This is Matthew Silverman with a follow-up to the InfoComm webinar from December 6, 2011, Designing Classrooms in the Digital Age. This is, and I'm calling the missing slides. Got a lot of feedback and questions both during and after the webinar, and I put together about 3 slides. This is kind of a follow-up on some of the more common themes that I figured this was a good way to get the information out there. The first topic I got a couple questions is HDSDI or 3G SDI viable formats for putting together Pro AV systems? And as I understand, I'm not a broadcast person, but these are used very much in the broadcast studio environment, and from a technical specification are really designed to support video formats up in resolution up to 1080p. They're video format centric, not data format centric. In the one application I've looked at integrating them, the problem I ran into was no HDCP support. I've looked at a couple of boxes which do conversions, but again, HDCP is the problem. And they're really designed to move video around the studio environment. They're not designed to be or studio or any other environment really. They're not designed to be a presentation format or a data format. That's really where you get into HDMI or DisplayPort. So I wouldn't really consider these viable formats for putting together a classroom system at this point in time. A couple of questions about EDID, Extended Display Information Data. EDID is a format that allows a source and a display to communicate to each other. And I want to first give a hat tip to John Donahue, who's our engineer here at George Mason. He's put together a lot of great reference information, which I pulled this from. Really, when you look at EDID, the goal is to try to manage it and monitor it. As I've seen devices out there which fake it or try to force things. When we looked at EDID in our environment, we really had to define what we supported and what we didn't support as far as resolutions, display ratios, aspect ratios, and those sorts of things. And there's so many different computer resolutions out there. It's something we had to look at. The real big thing I'll throw out with EDID, you need to be aware of it. You need to understand how to read the data in your system. So if you think you're having a problem where you're not getting communication, where you're not having resolution match, you need to be able to see what your source is sending and what your display thinks it's getting to see if you have a mismatch in there. How you're going to do that will depend on whose equipment you're using and how the hardware works. I think something you need to be aware of, it's going to be system specific on what tools you'll have available. The other thing you may want to look at is building EDID tables. It's something that we do at George Mason. Our projector has known supported resolutions. So on user device ports or auxiliary ports, we do limit which resolutions we will support on the input side to prevent a display to try to send or a source device to send something we can't display well. The best thing I'll say here is I know there's a couple again of these EDID minders or whatever out there. Don't try to fake it. Manage it with your system. This last slide is something I'm calling quick answers. There was a couple of common questions which really didn't have a great deal of research or data I would put visually, but I just wanted to kind of hit as bullet points. The first one is scaling. A couple of people asked about this. How do you handle scaling? And generally, you can handle scaling in one of two ways. You handle it at your projector, or you handle it via a component, a scaler within the system. Both are valid depending on your application. With our first design, we chose only to scale at the projector. The projectors we use are 1280 by 800 native, and we found they can pretty much scale any signal coming in up to about 1080. The only thing they don't seem to handle well is 1920 by 1200. That may be an option for you if you're very worried about always having the closest image you can have. A better option may be looking at a hardware scaler inline that you just set to whatever your native resolution is on your display device. The other option also is that 1920 by 1200 projectors are really starting to come down in price and be somewhat reasonable. So something to look at is just putting a 1920 by 1200 projector as your display source or a 1080p monitor, and that'll probably handle the majority of your resolutions. Today I'm seeing that most projectors, generally I would say that the better manufacturers can handle scaling pretty well. It's more actually display monitors where I've seen somewhat suspect in how they handle scaling. So that's scaling. Next one looking at is Apple and digital, and I'll say this, your mileage may vary. I've seen two of the same Apple devices with two of the same connections not work the same on the same system we have at George Mason. Similarly, I've heard field reports from people who say, oh, we've never had problems, to other people who say, well, it works fine on my system. The general problem we've run into with Apple is actually the analog dongles not working with a digital system. We've actually had, to the best of my knowledge, no problem with any Apple with a digital output adapting it to HDMI and taking it into our digital media system via HDMI, which is our preferred methodology. We have found that the Apples with the DVI connectors and the mini DVI connectors do not work well with their corresponding VGA dongles going into a VGA connector. Mini DisplayPort, both first and second generation, we actually have seen no problem going either VGA or HDMI. And lately with the Thunderbolt laptops, we've had somewhat inconsistent results. In our lab testing, VGA worked fantastically. However, for some of our faculty, it did not. We did tweak some ED/ID settings, and this was specific to Crestron. We had been using the copy projector. We went from copy projector to setting up our own manual tables. One of the things we did find working with Apple, that Apple does not like Crestron's auto nor its copy projector. We did find out building manual tables was the way to go to best support Apple product. So Thunderbolt, our official recommendation, is use an HDMI adapter. On the protocol, there's nothing which really should perform differently than DisplayPort, since Thunderbolt is really just DisplayPort plus PCI Express, but that's what we found in real-world testing. Networking, just wanted to touch on this a little. Got a couple questions about how do you configure your network, particularly Crestron digital media, but also what happens if your network goes down. This has been a real concern, and it's both a Crestron product, but I think as you look at the other product which is coming out, which provides these solutions, Crestron's digital media product in particular requires a network to communicate. They've gone away from the proprietary CrestNet bus and are now using TCP/IP communications for system communication. We started working prior to going digital, but really rolled out when we went digital a dedicated audiovisual VLAN throughout our campuses, and that's actually multiple campuses. George Mason is a distributed campus environment. The idea was to create an isolated network space that was managed by our audiovisual group, so we could guarantee that the only thing that was on that segment were devices we managed. There was a couple of rough bumps working it out with our networking group, but after we really sat down with them and said, this is what we're looking in a network for in a network, we gave them actual requirements. They worked very well with us to architect a solution, and it's worked out really well. Networking, I don't think, is this problem, which I'd say is directly related to digital, but it's kind of something that's happening at the same time as devices in the AV industry are moving to digital formats. TCP/IP enabled communication and network-based control is really emerging at the same time. So you generally will have to solve this problem for yourself along at the same time. Couple of questions about people about, can we use extenders and, either twisted pair extenders, fiber-based extenders? And sure, it's good product. I mean, it's just, basically extending your signal. Um, there's, different type of product out there. And I'll say you just have to think about the conversation about extenders versus digital systems, where are you building a series of components which then make a system, or are you using an end-to-end solution? Both will work. The question is, what do you get out of it? Sometimes you'll pay more for a completely integrated system, sometimes you won't. What tools do you get? What support tools? What diagnostics do you get? And what value does it add? We've done one application where it just made sense for us to use extenders. Actually, I think we bought a product from Triplite because it was the cheapest thing the cheapest thing we could find, and it was $150. It got us 50 feet worth of dual link DVI, and that was plenty, and it was exactly what we needed in that situation. So there's definitely a time and place. In that time, we were just augmenting an existing system. So, but if you're going to design something from scratch and you have the budget, I really recommend doing an end-to-end digital system where you're able to transcode everything to a common format for both short haul and long haul distances. And it just, in my opinion, provides a cleaner experience when you have a single system. And the final question, I got a lot of this, both some of the questions that were submitted during the presentation, but also in some follow-ups afterwards via email, which was, why did George Mason select Crestron's digital media product line? A lot of this goes back to when we started working on this local problem for us. We really started our digital not troubleshooting, but our digital solution seeking in 2009. And the reason we were doing this is we were about to open a very large classroom building on our Arlington campus, which it ended up having around 35 classrooms. And this building now hosts the majority of the classrooms on this campus. There's one other building which only has about 10 or 12 classrooms. So really, whatever went into this new building was Founders Hall. It would really, I guess, be the definition of that campus and classrooms for the next 5 to 8 years, depending on when we got around to having funding to replace the technology in the classroom environments. So when we started looking at this and looking out, this building was going to go operational for January 2011. And we really said, okay, can we wait for a 5-year replacement cycle before being digital in that building? And the answer after internal discussion was no. That would mean we'd be waiting till 2016 or later to be able to support digital product in that building. And that just wasn't acceptable, as we look forward. So we went out and we saw what was on the market, and it was actually not a whole heck of a lot. There was some stuff in the residential side. You looked and Crestron had launched digital media, probably I think at the InfoComm. I think it was in InfoComm 2009. You had some Geffen product on the market. You had some very limited Extron product. It was mostly extenders. Actually, there was some Kramer product on the market that we had looked at. And then you had a couple of companies who were less mainstream. And so when we looked at it, we said, well, we really are only seeing one solution here for a true end-to-end product, and that was, at that point, digital media. Now, before this, I'll say that George Mason was a very heavy Crestron environment. We had started with Crestron in our classrooms in around 2003. And in around 2007, we really embraced Quick Media. And Quick Media was an awesome product for us because it allowed us to very easily build a lot of systems quickly and, almost in 2 years, double the number of classroom systems we had at George Mason. So we've had very good results. And where we looked at, Extron product, which would have required piecing a couple of products together, and we liked Extron. We had been using Extron switchers for a long time. Kramer, which we've used in limited capacity, but again, there was no single product solution. It really came down to that Crestron really provided the best end-to-end solution for us. And one of the things I'd like to talk about with this is that for us, digital media is just more than digital. The amount of diagnostics that you get from the digital media tools with Inside Toolbox really, in my opinion, are the best thing that we've gotten out of the platform. Digital's great, and I'm not saying that that's bad, but the idea of having a single comprehensive diagnostic tool is awesome. So, from a desk, I can look at, sitting at our Fairfax campus, I can look at a system at our Prince William campus and say, what's going on here? Okay, well, let me try something, change something in the EDID tables. Did that fix it for the instructor? No, okay, well, let's try another port. Here, let me dynamically change the routes, and things like that. And that really, to me, was the seller, that this was a true end-to-end product. If you're looking today, I would recommend, looking at everything out there. For us, if people who've looked at our configuration posts online, we've embraced the 8x8 very heavily. We're now starting to look into the DMPS 300. I think it's a great product. But ask yourself, could you build a platform out of whatever you're looking for? And if the answer is yes, that's great. Go with the product that works for you. But when we selected in 2009, that was really the only product which is available which met that need. So the other question I've got about it is networking problems. We use a DHCP environment for our networking with it. We've had no problems. Only problems we ran into were we had some DHCP scope problems where we did not have enough space dedicated for all the IP address that were required. Other than that, we've had no real problems with it on the network. So that's really about it. So anyway, I want to thank you for listening to this follow-up. If you have any questions, you probably already have my contact information at this point in time. So feel free to drop me a line. I'll be happy to follow up with you on anything which I forgot to get to. Thanks.